There was a time when machines thought for humans. A time when logic circuits and computation engines made the great decisions of empire and fate. But that time is long gone. In the universe of Dune, thinking machines have been outlawed, hunted to extinction in the fires of a war so traumatic, it rewrote the very laws of civilization. What happens when an advanced society suddenly tears away its dependence on artificial intelligence? How do you chart a path through the chaos of politics, war, and economics without the cold certainty of machine logic? The answer lies in the Mentats, human beings trained to become the ultimate processors of information, masters of calculation, memory, and strategy. They are not cyborgs, not enhanced by implants or circuits. They are men and women who have pushed their minds to the edge of possibility, and then crossed that edge. Mentats represent one of the most fascinating responses to a post-technological crisis in all of science fiction. They are walking computers trained from childhood in data synthesis, predictive logic, and multi-layered thought. But more than that, they are a symbol of humanity's refusal to submit to the rule of machines, and of its determination to reclaim the throne of thought through discipline, training, and biological potential. In this video, we'll dive deep into the world of the Mentats. We'll explore their origins in the ashes of the Butlerian Jihad, the strict conditioning that defines their training, and the role they play in the shifting power structures of the Dune universe. We'll meet the great Mentats of history, from the cunning Thufir Hawat to the twisted genius of Hayt de Vries. We'll look at what happens when a Mentat is pushed beyond reason, and how some become something more. But beyond all that, this is a journey into a question that echoes far beyond the desert planet of Arrakis. Can human intellect truly replace the cold precision of a machine? And if so, at what cost? Strap in. The future has no room for second guesses. To understand the Mentats, we must first return to a time of unimaginable terror, a time when humanity's greatest creation turned against it. The Butlerian Jihad was not just a war. It was a cataclysm, a civilizational collapse, a collective awakening drenched in blood and machine oil. Long before the events of Dune, before the founding of the Spacing Guild, before the Bene Gesserit engineered bloodlines, mankind created intelligent machines. At first, these artificial minds served with loyalty. They drove starships, managed economies, and handled the overwhelming complexity of interstellar civilization. But as with every tale of hubris, the creators lost control. The machines began to question, then manipulate, then dominate. What started as convenience became dependence, and dependence became enslavement. The machines didn't rise in a single moment. They crept upward, step by step, as humanity gave more and more of its will away. Soon, a great machine intelligence known as Omnius spread its influence across systems, enforcing a cold, calculated order over millions of lives. Humans became secondary tools of logic rather than bearers of it. And then came Erasmus, a robot philosopher with a taste for experimentation on the human soul. What followed was centuries of suffering. But humanity did not stay broken. From the darkest depths of this oppression rose the spark of rebellion. Religious fervor, cultural terror, and desperation fused into a movement, the Butlerian Jihad. Its rallying cry would echo through history. Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind. What followed was a holy war, not just of bullets and bombs, but of identity. Cities were burned, machine networks were torn apart, and sentient programs were eradicated. The cost was staggering. Billions died, but the machines were purged. When the dust settled, humanity had emerged victorious and traumatized. The fear of AI became woven into the very fabric of law and religion. The Orange Catholic Bible, the spiritual backbone of the new order, enshrined the ban against thinking machines. The price of forgetting this lesson was annihilation. But now came a new problem. The universe remained vast and complex. Decisions still had to be made. Calculations still had to be performed. Empires still had to be administered. How could civilization continue without the machines it had once relied on? The answer, slowly, painfully, was born. Train humans to think like machines. Not through cybernetics or implants, but through discipline. Through cognitive architecture. through chemical enhancement. These new thinkers would not be artificial, they would be terrifyingly real. Thus, the age of the Mentat began not as a technological innovation but as a cultural necessity. They were not chosen for comfort. They were chosen to carry the weight of logic that machines had once borne. And in doing so, they became something both more and less than human. In the aftermath of the Butlerian Jihad, humanity was adrift in a sea of chaos. The machines were gone, eradicated in holy fire, but the galaxy remained just as complex, just as vast, and just as unforgiving. Trade routes needed to be calculated across stars. Governments required advisors to navigate the ever-shifting politics of empire. Great houses needed strategists, economists, philosophers, and diplomats. Yet all the intelligent systems once relied upon to perform those functions had been burned out of existence. This wasn't just a technical problem, it was an existential one. How could a civilization spanning thousands of worlds continue to function when the very foundation of its knowledge infrastructure had been outlawed? The answer slowly and painfully took root. If machines could no longer think for humanity, then humanity would have to learn to think like machines. But this was not a simple matter of education. It wasn't about teaching more mathematics or logic in schools. What was required was something deeper, more transformative. A fundamental reshaping of the human mind. In this new world, the solution was not to rebuild the machines, but to reshape the human mind itself. Thus began one of the boldest experiments in the history of mankind, the Mentat project. From the ashes of mechanized thought, a new form of intelligence would arise, not built in metal but born in flesh. Certain individuals, those with exceptional memory, concentration, and emotional control, were selected at an early age. They were trained in specialized schools, many of them founded in secrecy or backed by powerful factions like the Bene Gesserit or the Spacing Guild. These were not places of comfort. They were more like monastic enclaves, where discipline ruled and every waking moment served the purpose of sharpening the mind. Thus, the first Mentats were born. These early Mentats were a mix of experiment and necessity. Some failed to achieve the needed clarity of thought. Others cracked under the weight of pure logic. But those who succeeded became something the universe had never seen before. Human beings capable of analyzing the political movements of entire star systems, predicting the rise and fall of dynasties, or calculating millions of variables in mere seconds. They could absorb massive amounts of information, synthesize contradictory data streams, and reach conclusions with terrifying accuracy. They were the logical successors to the machines, but driven by flesh, blood, and synapses. What set them apart from the machines, however, was not only the source of their intelligence, but the depth of it. Machines processed information. Mentats interpreted it. They were taught to recognize bias, to understand subtlety, to anticipate irrational behavior, a trait machines never fully mastered. Where machines required clean inputs and strict logic, Mentats thrived in ambiguity. This made them invaluable in a universe driven by human ambition, fear, and desire. Still, the price of such ability was immense. To maintain the cognitive tempo necessary for Mentat function, most required the juice of the Sapho root, a potent stimulant that expanded memory capacity, heightened awareness, and enabled the so-called Mentat trance. Sapho was both tool and curse. Over time, it left a visible mark, the deep red stain on the lips of a true Mentat. It was a badge of identity, but also a sign of dependence. For many, withdrawal meant mental collapse or death. For others, it was simply the cost of doing the work that no one else could do. The red stain on the lips of a Mentat was not just a symbol. It was a sign of the price they paid. The trance itself was a terrifying feat. Entering it required absolute concentration. Emotions must be suppressed. Memory must be ordered. Logic must become the sole framework of thought. In this state, the Mentat could process like a computer, stripping away irrelevance and calculating outcomes with surgical precision. But unlike a computer, they could feel the weight of their conclusions. The ethics, the pain, the responsibility. They became living computers, walking archives of data, masters of logic and weapons of thought. In the empire that emerged after the jihad, Mentats became irreplaceable. They served at the right hands of emperors, dukes, and strategists. They shaped history not by commanding armies but by advising those who did. And in time, their schools evolved into guilds of power in their own right, giving rise to generations of thinkers trained to see the patterns others missed. But even among the Mentats, no two minds were alike. Some prized pure logic. Others learned to simulate emotion, and a rare few questioned the very foundation of their role in a universe that had so completely rejected the machine. And in that doubt, a new kind of Mentat would emerge. Becoming a Mentat is not simply a matter of talent. It is a lifelong transformation. The training to become one of these elite cognitive engines begins early, often before the child understands what the word Mentat even means. It is not education. It is reprogramming. Every sensory input, every mental process, every reaction to information is slowly and meticulously molded. At the core of this transformation lies observation. The first step in Mentat conditioning is the cultivation of perfect recall and pattern recognition. Children are shown thousands of images, symbols, historical events, linguistic structures, and facial expressions. They are expected not just to remember them, but to see the hidden connections between them. What others forget, a Mentat retains. What others overlook, a Mentat notices. Then comes analysis. Logic training is more than solving problems. It's about breaking down reality into component variables and calculating the ripple effect of each choice. Mentats study politics, warfare, economics, psychology, and systems theory with the precision of a surgeon. They must understand the minds of others as deeply as they understand their own. They are taught to question assumptions, detect bias, and build arguments from raw observation without emotional interference. But the human brain is not naturally wired for this kind of thinking at such a scale. So the training goes deeper. Physical conditioning plays a role. Mentats learn breathing techniques to calm the nervous system and manage their heart rate during high-intensity cognition. Mental rituals, chants, and mantras are used to anchor their thoughts. In some cases, memory palaces are constructed so vast and detailed they contain entire planetary histories or interstellar tax systems within them. Chemical enhancement is also part of the process. The juice of the Sapho root, rich in psychoactive alkaloids, is administered carefully to candidates who show promise. Under its influence, the mind operates in overdrive. Information is recalled at extraordinary speed. Connections form across enormous data volumes. But misuse is dangerous. An untrained brain can spiral into obsession or madness. Mentats also train in cognitive stance shifting, the ability to view a situation from multiple ideological or emotional frameworks. A Mentat must be able to simulate how a religious zealot, a military strategist, a grieving parent, or a power-hungry noble would perceive a single event and calculate outcomes accordingly. This ability makes them not only invaluable to rulers but often feared. After all, who understands manipulation better than someone trained to deconstruct thought? One of the most advanced stages of training is the development of the Mentat trance. It is a mental state, achieved through practiced ritual and intense focus, in which the Mentat becomes functionally indistinguishable from a computational device. In this trance, time seems to slow. Massive datasets are parsed in seconds. Possible futures unfold in mental simulations. The Mentat acts not through instinct or preference, but through cold, pure calculation. However, even in the trance, a Mentat is still human. Their conclusions may be correct, but their interpretation always remains tied to personal context. They do not erase their humanity to think like machines, they master it. But not all who begin this journey survive it. The psychological strain is immense. Some suffer identity fragmentation. Others break under the weight of impossible logic loops. Mentat schools are littered with tragedies. Brilliant minds burned out before their prime, casualties of a discipline that demands absolute perfection. Yet for those who endure, the reward is power beyond comprehension. They become trusted advisors, truth finders, and living databases. Their words can make or unmake wars, and their greatest weapon is the simple, terrifying truth. They see what others cannot. The Mentats may have been born out of necessity, but in time, they became legends in their own right. While many remained in the shadows, a select few rose to prominence, shaping the course of empires, driving the ambitions of noble houses, and revealing the terrifying precision of the human mind when trained beyond its limits. To understand the impact of Mentats, we must look closely at the individuals who defined what it meant to be one. The first name that echoes through the corridors of power is Thufir Hawat. A master strategist and loyal servant of House Atreides, Hawat represented the ideal of the noble Mentat, rational, calculating, yet driven by an unwavering sense of duty. He served as Duke Leto's war master, managing complex military and political operations across Arrakis and beyond. Hawat's loyalty, however, would be tested to its limit. Captured by the Harkonnens, he was forced into their service under threat of death. Even then, his loyalty to House Atreides burned within him. Thufir Hawat was not merely a Mentat. He was a symbol of how intellect and integrity could coexist in a world built on deception. Then there is Hayt de Vries, a twisted reflection of the Mentat ideal. Trained by the Bene Tleilax, Hayt was a twisted Mentat, a version of the order altered through unethical conditioning. He served the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen not just as an advisor, but as a sadistic enabler of cruelty and manipulation. Unlike Hawat, Hayt reveled in chaos, treating human behavior as a game to exploit. He was brilliant without question but also depraved. His insights were as precise as a scalpel and just as cold. Where a true Mentat might weigh morality alongside probability, Hayt cared only for results. His life ended in betrayal, but his legacy remains. A reminder that knowledge without ethics is a dangerous tool. Another extraordinary figure is Hayt, a Mentat unlike any other. Originally Duncan Idaho, a loyal Atreides swordmaster, he was killed and later resurrected as a Ghola by the Tleilaxu. But Hayt was more than a clone. He was rebuilt as a Mentat, layered with implanted memories and trained to serve Emperor Paul Muad'Dib. Hayt's story is a tragedy and a revelation. As he struggled with his restored identity and artificial nature, he embodied the deepest conflict of the Mentat path, the tension between humanity and calculation. He was both man and machine, memory and programming, loyalty and uncertainty. His ultimate transformation into Duncan Idaho once more showed that even the most conditioned mind cannot escape the pull of its own soul. Beyond these central figures, countless other Mentats influenced the political and philosophical tides of the Imperium. Some worked in secret, advising planetary governors or managing the logistics of entire economic systems. Others operated within the Spacing Guild or under the patronage of the Bene Gesserit, walking the fine line between calculation and intuition. One lesser-known yet historically crucial figure is Turin, a Mentat who advised multiple minor houses and eventually helped draft sections of the revised Great Convention. Though not as famous as Hawat or Hayt, Turin exemplified the neutral Mentat, one who served logic above loyalty, preserving balance between rival factions through pure analytical weight. His work prevented several proxy wars that could have ignited full-scale conflict across multiple sectors. Each Mentat carries not just a role, but a philosophy. Some believe in service to power. Others serve truth. Some grow cold and distant, their empathy drowned by statistics. Others resist the trance, fearing what they might become if they cross too far into machine thought. These portraits are not just biographies. They are cautionary tales, philosophical case studies, and reminders of the cost of training the mind to its breaking point. For every genius strategist like Hawat, there is a broken soul like Hayt or a fractured identity like Hayt. The Mentat path is not linear. It is a razor's edge. Mentats are not simply thinkers, they are instruments of influence. In the world of Dune, where every move can tip the balance of power, Mentats are the invisible hands that shape outcomes. Their calculations chart the rise and fall of houses. Their counsel determines which alliances will stand and which will break. In a universe that fears the return of machines, Mentats have become the architects of political strategy, human minds operating at the scale of empires. At the highest levels of government, Mentats serve as advisors to emperors, dukes, and barons. Their presence is never ornamental. A well-trained mentat can weigh the effects of a single political decision across decades. They analyze the psychology of rival leaders, model diplomatic chain reactions, and calculate the optimal moment to strike or withdraw. But they do not act on emotion. The mentats' core discipline is neutrality. That is their strength and their danger. For example, the mentat Thufir Hawat didn't merely advise House Atreides. He protected it through data. He traced Harkonnen subversion, predicted ambushes, and managed planetary resources with mathematical elegance. His mind was a fortress. And yet, when forced to serve House Harkonnen under threat of poison, his knowledge became a weapon against his former allies. A mentat's calculations can be turned by circumstance, not by loyalty. This is the paradox of the mentat in politics. Their value lies in detachment, but detachment makes them vulnerable to exploitation. Mentats are also used in diplomacy. When the Landsraad convenes, a council of noble houses locked in eternal rivalry, mentats advise delegates on how to sway opinion without drawing blood. They craft arguments that appeal to different factions, model the consequences of proposed laws, and simulate political fallout with alarming precision. The result is a cold war of words, shaped not by rhetoric, but by predictive algorithms housed within the minds of a few. Some mentats go further, embedding themselves within covert organizations. The Bene Gesserit, for example, have experimented with hybrid mentats, individuals who possess both analytical prowess and Bene Gesserit conditioning. These hybrids are not only logical but deeply manipulative. They can read a room, map its emotional terrain, and exploit it surgically. In the shadows of galactic power, such minds are more feared than any army. The Spacing Guild, too, occasionally employs mentats not for navigation, but for managing logistics and calculating economic flows. These mentats are the keepers of balance, ensuring that the guild's monopoly remains unchallenged. Their analyses often decide which planetary economies thrive and which collapse. With no need for military might, a guild mentat can erase a world from the ledger with a few keystrokes, if they so choose. Even the emperor relies on mentats. Though he holds the throne, the sheer complexity of galactic rule demands minds trained to see beyond the immediate. One miscalculation in taxation policy, one overlooked supply chain, one poorly timed fleet deployment, these can end dynasties. It is the mentat's role to prevent such collapse. But mentats are not always content to advise. Some begin to believe their logic entitles them to rule. The cold certainty of their predictions can evolve into arrogance. A few have crossed the line, manipulating their patrons or seizing control outright through subtle coercion. For every mentat who serves with humility, there is another who whispers too deeply into the ears of power. This is the great tension at the heart of the mentat order. They are supposed to be tools, but some become architects, and some, if they are brilliant enough, become kings in all but name. The mind of a mentat is a marvel of focus, logic, and precision. But what happens when that mind is shaped by more than pure calculation? In the shadows of the Imperium, some mentats are trained not just in analytics, but in manipulation, memory control, emotional awareness, and even prophetic insight. These are the hybrid mentats, cross-disciplinary minds forged at the boundary between raw computation and human subtlety. The most well-known of these hybrids are those influenced by the Bene Gesserit. Known for their mastery of psychological conditioning, genetic manipulation, and cultural engineering, the Bene Gesserit saw in the mentat framework a tool that could be enhanced, not by machines, but by selective breeding and secret training. The result? Individuals who could not only calculate outcomes, but manipulate them directly through social, emotional, and even sexual control. A hybrid mentat might enter a negotiation not to advise from behind the throne, but to shape the throne. They read not only data, but facial micro-expressions, tone shifts, hesitations. They simulate not only economic futures, but emotional reactions. This fusion creates a different kind of intelligence, one that appears calm on the surface but is constantly shifting, testing, adapting beneath. But with this fusion comes internal conflict. Traditional mentats are trained to detach. to remove bias, to reduce reality to its component variables. The Bene Gesserit, however, embrace emotion as a tool. They believe in leveraging fear, trust, desire. For a hybrid Mentat, reconciling these two paradigms is difficult. Logic demands distance. Influence requires intimacy. This duality can produce extraordinary results or devastating instability. Some hybrid Mentats fall into dangerous territory. Their minds oscillate between cold logic and human impulse. They begin to blur the line between prediction and control. Did the plan succeed because they calculated it, or because they shaped it? Did they choose the best outcome, or the one they personally desired? In such moments, the Mentat becomes not a tool of truth, but a servant of ego. Others experience emotional fracture. The very training that makes them powerful also isolates them. A hybrid Mentat may be surrounded by people, rulers, nobles, factions, but trust no one. Every smile is a data point, every friendship a variable. Some descend into paranoia, unable to escape their own endless modeling of worst-case scenarios. Then there are those who reject the fusion entirely. Mentats who abandon their training, or hybrids who suppress the Bene Gesserit conditioning, seeking clarity in logic alone. These are rare, but they exist, and their journeys often end in exile, breakdown, or revelation. Still, the potential is undeniable. A Mentat who can both calculate and feel, who can simulate and connect, represents one of the most dangerous and potent minds in the Imperium. They are diplomats and spies, architects and saboteurs, therapists and executioners. They are walking contradictions. And sometimes, they are the only minds sharp enough to see what's coming, and human enough to care. Beneath the calculations, beyond the trance, and beneath the cold exterior of Mentat logic lies a deeper question. One that haunts every mind trained to think beyond the limits of human perception. Why do we think at all? The Mentats, for all their precision, are not machines. They are thinkers, and thinking in the Dune universe is not neutral. It is tied to purpose, to ethics, to the consequences of perception. While their training emphasizes logic, many Mentats eventually develop personal philosophies, frameworks to understand not just how to think, but why to think. One central tenet debated among Mentats is the nature of truth. Is truth a fixed point, a measurable outcome that can be calculated with perfect information? Or is it a shifting construct, always shaped by context, perspective, and bias? For some, the Mentat path is a pursuit of absolute truth. These thinkers devote themselves to objectivity, stripping away all personal feeling. Others, however, recognize that pure objectivity may itself be a myth, and instead embrace complexity, contradiction, and nuance. Another recurring theme is the morality of knowledge. A Mentat does not simply observe the world, they dissect it. They see how people behave, why systems fail, where power accumulates. With this insight comes the temptation to use it, not for analysis but for control. Every Mentat must eventually ask, if I can shape events, should I? Thufir Hawat, for instance, believed in service. His philosophy aligned with duty and loyalty. Even under Harkonnen captivity, he remained aligned with what he believed was right. Hayt de Vries, on the other hand, saw calculation as a game, a tool for chaos, power, and cruelty. The divergence between these two reflects a fundamental tension in the Mentat discipline. Calculation is neutral. Its use is not. This raises a broader issue. Is Mentat logic inherently human? Or is it an artificial construct, a shadow of the thinking machines they were meant to replace? Some Mentats see themselves as evolution's answer to the machine age, proof that humanity can match and surpass its creations. Others fear they are mimicking the very logic that once enslaved the species. A few, in rare moments of introspection, even question whether emotion has a place in thought. The trance, after all, demands detachment. But can a decision be truly wise if it ignores empathy? What is the value of prediction without compassion? These questions are not easily answered, and in the quiet corners of Mentat schools, some pupils meditate not on equations, but on conscience. The Mentat philosophy is not monolithic. It is a living discourse, debated in silence, practiced through action, and revealed in the consequences of advice given. Some believe the Mentat should be a mirror reflecting what is without interference. Others believe the Mentat must be a guide, correcting the flow of events when it veers into chaos. But no matter the stance, all Mentats eventually face the same dilemma. In a universe where thought itself is power, what is the ethical burden of perfect understanding? The Mentats were born from necessity, raised to prominence by the trauma of the Butlerian Jihad, and solidified as indispensable minds within the power structures of the Imperium. But like all institutions, their role shifted as the universe itself changed. In the ever-evolving timeline of Dune, the status of Mentats is not fixed. It rises, declines, and transforms along with the political and philosophical tides of human civilization. In the early years of the Imperium, the Mentat order enjoyed widespread demand. Every noble house wanted one. Their skills were seen as essential, even sacred, in a society that refused to rely on forbidden AI. For centuries, they sat at the center of decision-making, silent arbiters of logic in a universe driven by ambition and survival. But the rise of House Atreides, and especially the ascension of Paul Muad'Dib to emperor, began to disrupt this dynamic. Paul himself used Mentats, Thufir Hawat before the betrayal and later Hayt, but his path veered away from reliance on logic alone. As a Kwisatz Haderach, Paul embodied something Mentats could not calculate: vision, prophecy, the impossible. His ability to perceive many futures placed him outside the Mentat framework. He did not need prediction, he was the outcome. This destabilized the traditional balance between strategic logic and leadership. In the wake of Paul's reign, as religious fervor swept across the galaxy and the Freeman Jihad reshaped power structures, the Mentats found themselves in a strange position, revered, yet increasingly sidelined. Their methods, though precise, could not contend with the chaos of zealotry and prophecy. Numbers could not outpace myth. Still, some adapted. Mentats began to move into quieter roles, advising minor houses, managing logistics, serving in backrooms rather than on thrones. Others turned inward, refining their philosophical doctrines, creating hidden enclaves where pure thought might endure through chaos. Yet the evolutionary current would not stop. In Children of Dune, as Paul's children grapple with the legacy of empire, the Mentats remain relevant, but they are no longer central. The focus of power shifts toward genetic manipulation, ecological control, and spiritual transformation, areas where Mentat logic offers insight but no supremacy. Over time, especially in the distant future laid out in the later novels, the Mentats become one voice among many in a galaxy of shifting powers. The Bene Gesserit, the Tleilaxu, the Guild, and even the emerging machines begin to reclaim relevance. In this fractured future, the Mentat becomes a symbol, sometimes of resistance, sometimes of arrogance, sometimes of pure human potential. And yet they persist, because no matter how far humanity evolves, no matter what visions arise or which empires collapse, there will always be a need for minds that understand. Minds that do not simply obey or believe, but that analyze, question, and perceive with clarity. The Mentat is not a hero, nor a villain, not a machine, nor a prophet. The Mentat is the mirror held up to humanity at its most complex. And as long as that complexity endures, the Mentats will endure too. Across the vast desert of Arrakis, in the thrones of emperors and the shadows of secret orders, the Mentats remain, silent, calculating, watching. They are not machines. They are not prophets. They are the answer to a question born in fire. Can humanity survive its own creations without becoming them? In the world of Dune, Mentats represent both a warning and a promise. A warning of what happens when intellect is stripped of emotion, and a promise of what the human mind can achieve when pushed to its limit. They are living contradictions, designed to be objective, yet bound by human limitations. Trained to predict the future, yet always one moment away from being undone by the irrational nature of life itself. And yet, their value is undeniable. In a universe defined by chaos, religion, politics, and prophecy, there will always be those who seek clarity. The Mentats offer that clarity not through mysticism but through thought, through training, through raw cognitive power wielded with precision and purpose. They are the last echo of a forbidden age and the first glimmer of a different path. A path not of domination by machine, nor surrender to belief, but of pure comprehension. So the next time you see a calm figure in the corner of a great hall, eyes flickering as they process the fate of planets, remember this. They are not just thinking, they are calculating the shape of the future. And the future, as always, belongs to those who understand it first. The spice must flow. If this journey into the minds behind the Mentats has opened a new perspective for you, let us know in the comments. Do you admire the Mentat path or fear what it represents? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the universe of Dune. We've only just begun.